So just for background, my name is Makbraids. I'm the Director of Evidence at the Early Intervention Foundation in the UK. And I'm going to talk a bit about who we are and what we do, and then take you through some of our work and give some reflections on the policy landscape in the UK and where approaches to early intervention and prevention are in the UK landscape. I wanted to start with when we came into existence, and we were founded in 2011, and we were founded on the back of a series of reports by this person I'm showing here, whose name was Graham Allen, who was an opposition member for Parliament and a lifelong advocate for the need to shift spending away from statutory services and into prevention and early intervention to support better outcomes for children. And the reason why I start with this, as my first slide, about the origins of our organisation, is because Graham was a member of opposition, but he was asked by David Cameron's government to write these reports. And at least in the UK system, that's very unusual to have a member of Parliament, an opposition member of Parliament, working directly to 10 Downing Street. And I think that shows the support, the cross-party support there was for this idea of moving towards more prevention and early intervention around that time, post-financial crisis, and the need to think more carefully about how we design and deliver services for children and families. So the Early Intervention Foundation is what's called a What Works Centre, and we're a member of a network of organisations, all of whom are independent of government, but all of whom have very close links into government. Most of them are charities, and they exist to do independent and high quality research on the effectiveness of different approaches within specific policy areas. So we look at early intervention. The Education Endowment Foundation, as their name suggests, looks at education and particularly closing the gap between disadvantaged children and their peers. NICE looks at health and social care and so on. And this is quite an unusual model in my experience in international terms, to have these organisations who are very close to government and quite influential within government, but independent. We don't sit within government, we're not accountable to a minister and so on. So we are, 2018, we set our new vision and mission, and our mission is about to ensure effective early intervention is available and used to improve the lives of children and young people at risk of poor outcomes. And I'm going to say a little bit about what we mean by that as I go forward. As an organisation, we try to take a very holistic view of children and child development. So we talk a lot about these 4 overlapping domains of development: cognitive, behavioural, social, emotional and physical. And we try to advise that we need policies and services which think about all of these aspects. And one of the challenges we have in the UK is that we have a system that is quite divided, I suppose. You know, we've got a department for health that is very interested in children's physical health. We've got a department for education which is interested in cognitive development and educational outcomes. And often the links between those areas of development are not seen. And we try to encourage a more holistic look at how children's development. This is a slide from our strategy, just to give you an idea of how we function. So as the Director of Evidence, I run the evidence generation function, that block in the middle. We produce high quality research on various aspects of children's development and early intervention. I'm going to say a little bit about some of those as I go forward. But we don't do that just to produce interesting research. We really want to make a difference in the real world. So we have a very strong policy and practice function that we work very, very closely with, that seeks to try and influence both central and local government about how you use that evidence to redesign services. So we've got a number of people, including myself, who are ex-civil servants, who understand how central government operates and is able to translate that evidence into meaningful policy advice. And we're in certainly central government departments a lot, talking to them about what this evidence means and what difference it should be making for policy design. These are just some examples of some of the products we produce. As a research organisation, we certainly do produce those big, thick research reports, but we try to have quite a range of product and ways to engage with our activity. So we also produce commissioner guides, apps, animations, short reports. We're very active on social media and so on to try and encourage policymakers, practitioners, commissioners to engage with our evidence. And we also seek to really try and part of the debate. One thing we've tried very hard as an organisation to do is what we call earn our seat at the table. So we try to be a trusted partner to government, we try to provide frank and independent advice, but we want to be in the conversation. So we want to be at the round table, the senior policy debates. The bottom left-hand corner, that's us giving evidence in Parliament to a Parliament Select Committee, where we publish a lot in the sector press, speak at party conferences and so on, because we want to be in the conversation and we want evidence and evaluation to be a serious part of debates around children and family policy. So that's who we are, but what is early intervention? Well, we define it as identifying and providing support to children and young people at risk of poor outcomes, such as mental health problems, poor academic achievement, or involvement in crime or antisocial behaviour. So a very broad definition. And we really crystallised that in our report from 2018 called Realising the Potential of Early Intervention, where we really set out a few years after the Cameron government what we thought early intervention meant and its place in the social policy landscape in the UK. We started that not with an evidence-based argument, but with the social and moral case. Too many children in England, and it's a sort of anomaly of the UK system. Most of our work is England only and not across the other countries of the United Kingdom. So too many children in England face disadvantages that affect their development and threat future health and happiness. But we think effective early intervention, so interventions, services, programmes with rigorous evaluation evidence of improving outcomes for children is absolutely a key part to addressing that social and moral case. And we make that very strongly in the report I'm referring to. We talk a lot about the economic case. I think in the early days of the Early Intervention Foundation, there was an assumption that early intervention would generate short-term cash savings, and we don't think that's very likely or true. We think there's a very strong long-term economic argument that early intervention will improve a range of outcomes across education, mental health, employability, and so on. But in the short term, it probably means spending more money and creating higher quality services to develop those. It's unlikely to generate short-term cash releasing savings. And if you're doing it to save money, it's probably not going to pay off. We also talk a lot about pressure on the social care system. So in England, social services are under quite a lot of pressure, have been for a number of years. The number of children in statutory care has been rising. There was an assumption that early intervention could support, help with this and help keep children out of the care system. We think that's a very, very credible argument, but that's not going to happen overnight. This is about medium and long-term investment to improve services and generate better outcomes for children. You're not going to see a change in the number of children entering the social care system as a result of improving early intervention services in 6 months or a year's time. It's longer term than that. And just moving on from that, I've talked a little bit about what early intervention is, but sometimes we define it as what it isn't. So this is a report we did from 2016, so quite old now, where we just tried to calculate the cost of what we call late intervention. And this is the cost of statutory services being provided to children and young people in England. And we reckoned that was about £17 billion a year, around 20 billion euros, or nearly £287 per person. And that's a mixture of services from social care, crime and antisocial behaviour, health services for mental health or substance misuse, and so on and so forth. We don't claim that all of that money could be saved through early intervention, but clearly that's a lot of money, and even incremental improvements in that spend are worth having. And a lot of these statutory services are relatively ineffective as well. You know, the children's life chances by the point that they enter the social care system in general are fairly poor. As an aside, this work got picked up by colleagues in Australia. They thought this was a really strong advocacy tool. They commissioned us to do a similar piece of work in Australia, which we published in 2019. Very similar story, similar numbers, you know, a strong increase in hospitalisations for young people due to mental health, rise in childhood obesity, so on and so forth. And this is in Australian dollars, but you know, we calculated that Australia was spending about 15 billion Australian dollars, so that'd be about 7 billion pounds, 10 billion euros a year on late intervention. And again, this was used a lot in campaigns, media activity and so on to make the case of shifting away from statutory services and into early intervention. So I'm going to talk a bit about our work and some of the areas that we concentrate on. So we divided our work into broadly 4 portfolios of activity. So the first and our biggest is the early years. We're not an early years specific charity. We cover conception to early adulthood, but we do a lot of work in the early years, particularly around parenting, home learning environment, the effectiveness of early education services, and so on and so forth. This is probably our biggest area. This isn't the totality of our work, but these are some of recent examples of projects. They're all available on the website, by the way. Unfortunately, not in Latvian at the minute. The second portfolio is mental health and wellbeing. This is a growing portfolio of activity for us. So we've always had a strong interest in both the social emotional learning of children and adolescent mental health. And we published a few months ago a big systematic review of the effectiveness of school-based adolescent mental health interventions, which is a really sort of groundbreaking piece of work in the UK context. Oh, going the wrong way. The third area or portfolio is what we call interparental conflict. This is looking at the influence of frequent, intense and poorly resolved couple conflict on children's development, particularly in the context of economic disadvantage, and what works to improve that. That's a large portfolio of activity for us, an increasing area of social policy intervention in the UK. And finally, and sort of our broadest portfolio is what we call child vulnerability. So this includes lots of areas, including child maltreatment, child sexual abuse, adverse childhood experiences, crime and gang involvement, and so on and so forth. So lots of very broad topic areas, and that's one of the challenges of this, is that we cover such a range of activities. And outside our sort of portfolios of subject matter, we also have a strong focus on improving the quality of evaluation of services. So we work a lot both with central and local government on trying to improve evaluation. This is a slide taken from a report of a few years ago that we call 10 Steps to Evaluation Success, which sets our framework for the evaluation journey, how you build high quality evidence of the effectiveness of services and how you test if they're making the difference that you think they should be. And we work a lot with local areas to try and operationalise this and try and support them to make better use of evaluation. So that's our portfolio. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of reports, just to make this a little bit more real, I suppose, for you to understand the sorts of things, the sorts of messages we're putting out. The first one was a few years old now, but I think still is a really powerful example of the work we do, and it's called Foundation for Life. And this is a review of the effectiveness of 75 interventions being delivered in the UK, targeting the early years, looking at domains of behaviour, attachment and cognitive development. Very intensive piece of work, and what that found is that across 75 interventions, we found that only 17 of them were evidence-based. and I'll go on to say a little bit about what we mean by evidence-based in a moment. The majority of those were in the domain of behaviour, so there was lots of well-evidenced interventions to support parents with children who have non-compliant behaviour, but far fewer in the other domains. And what do we mean by evidence-based? Well, this comes from what we call our standards of evidence. This is how to assess the effectiveness of interventions. So on our standards, a level 2 will be preliminary evidence of effectiveness. So there's some evidence that the intervention is associated with an improvement in children's outcomes, but the evaluation was not rigorous enough to establish causality. Whereas level 3 and level 4, where we say something is evidence-based, is where we have assessed in quite a lot of detail the qualitative evaluation and concluded it was rigorous enough to establish causality. We know that that intervention was driving an improvement in outcomes for children. So level 4 is the highest level you can achieve on our standards of evidence. That's reserved for interventions that have had at least 3 high quality evaluations, usually a randomised control trial. At least one of those needs to be independently conducted, and they need, at least one of them needs to have evidence of long-term impact, so that the outcomes were sustained for at least 1 year after the intervention finished. And I think the 100 or so programmes we've assessed, only 4 have achieved that level 4 standard. So that gives you an idea of the quality of evidence that we're looking at here. We make all that available freely on what we call our guidebook. This is a searchable database of programmes where you can look by level of evidence, by age group, by outcomes you're interested in. And that tells you both what we know about the effectiveness of the programme, the evidence, all that, but also a whole range of other things, such as our estimates of cost, the outcomes it's achieved, the practitioner qualifications needed to deliver it, the strength of the size of impact it's achieved, and so on. So we hope this is a really, really useful tool for commissioners, policymakers, and so on, who are looking at programmes and want to understand whether it's likely to work in their context. I thought I'd just, as one other piece of work just to decide before I go into more general discussion, is work we've done around early intervention and COVID. Like many organisations over the last year, we've been trying to make a contribution to both the understanding the impact of COVID and the recovery, what's needed for the recovery from COVID. And one of the first things we did, and this was in the very early stages, we published it in May 2020, so not long after we went into lockdown in the UK, was trying to review the evidence for how you deliver services virtually. So lots of programmes and interventions were being delivered face-to-face in the UK. That was the traditional method. And very rapidly, providers were trying to deliver these via Zoom or via the video conferencing platforms, and we're trying to understand what we know about the effectiveness of such approaches. We reviewed the evidence behind over 100 virtual interventions and concluded that yes, they can be effective in improving outcomes for children and young people. Little evidence to suggest they are more effective than traditional face-to-face approaches, and the evidence was strongest in interventions targeting mental health and well-being. They often face high levels of attrition, so people drop out of interventions delivered virtually at a higher rate than is standard in face-to-face interventions. And in general, those which have some sort of personalisation or practitioner contact rather than just a learning package or so on, tend to be to get better engagement from practitioners. And we went on to make a series of recommendations about what that meant for the sector, as they were very, very rapidly trying to adapt and deliver services, continue to deliver services in the context of lockdown. So that's some of our work, but I was going to finish by talking a little bit about some of the challenges and ways forward for early intervention. Just a couple more slides. Firstly, we're very active in terms of COVID recovery. The picture is emerging, but there's lots of troubling signs. Our estimates of average learning loss is that pupils have lost between 1 and 3 months of learning over the course of lockdown, and those disadvantaged pupils and those with lower levels of ability have experienced the greatest loss. A report from last year estimated that nearly over 3/4 of schools have reported pupils starting school with lower levels of speech and language development compared to pre-lockdown. There's rising mental health problems amongst our adolescents in the UK. That's a continuation of a long-term trend and a global trend, but it's still the case. And there's some signs that domestic abuse has increased over the period as well, including higher rates of calls to helplines regarding children who are experiencing or witnessing domestic abuse. So there are some signs of hope in terms of early intervention and prevention. So just in the last few weeks, we've gone through what we call spending reviews. It's a process in the UK where government announces its spending plans for the 3 years ahead. There's quite an intense period in the run up to that of lobbying government and trying to influence decisions from a whole range of organisations. And there has been some new money coming into prevention and early intervention. So around just under €600 million to support children and families over the course of spending review, and that's additional to current spending. About 200 million of that to expand support to families facing multiple and complex problems. Another around 200 million invested in support to new mothers, including perinatal mental health services, and so on and so forth. So less than we would have liked, but more than we feared we would get, I suppose, in terms of injection of money into prevention and early intervention services for children and families. But there's a lot of challenges that remain, and this is things that we talk a lot about. So, nationally, funding remains a problem. Spending on early intervention is extremely hard to measure. The data in the UK is not great. The very short-term nature of funding, local authorities who deliver a lot of these services have to balance their budgets year to year, and it can be hard to make the case for long-term investment in high-quality services. There's no children's minister in the UK for services, prevention and early intervention services, and children and families policy is spread across a number of government departments, so there's a lack of join-up and coordination. And we remain in a world in which we know less than we would like about what works. We say a lot that we need much greater investment in high-quality evaluation of services so we can understand what approaches are effective. So final slide for me, the key priorities that we talk to the government about in a UK context, and some of these might sound familiar and include long-term investment to understand what works, ensuring that the money is invested to the right services, ensuring that mental health is included in part of any education recovery programme in response to COVID, and establishing some sort of join-up across government departments so that some of the challenges that multiple departments and multiple ministers have in responsibility for different areas of family policy can be addressed. So that's all from me.